Today on the O&S Podcast, we have Dr. Troy Doucet. He's a good friend of mine, and Dr. Doucet has a PhD in philosophy. He did his postgrad work at University of Oxford, and he has given lectures at Cambridge and Oxford University, and he has been published many times and cited. And today we're just talking philosophy. Hope you enjoy. Dr. Doucet, how you doing?
It's all good, man. Everything's fine.
So is it crazy that you're the buffest philosophy major that I know?
Man, I'm just trying to keep up with Helen Mark Harley. Dude.
Well, we all are.
That's right, man. So, yeah, no, it's an interesting phenomenon, man, that many people have, I guess, a bias or stereotype of like what a philosophy professor looks like. It's the old guy with the long gray beard and, shit like that. But when I walk into class, it's always, there's always judgments being made
Sure.
about me. Like, who the hell does this guy think he is coming in here with his tight shirt on? And I'm making judgments like he's going to pass, he's going to fail. Yeah, she might make it, so their judgments go on both ways, dude.
Yeah, well, I wanted to thank you first of all, for being on. It's an honor. We're good friends, but
Yeah.
I always joke with people like he's the smartest guy I know. Like, I feel very stupid whenever I have a conversation with you. So I was like, this podcast is basically just me talking to people about things that I'm interested in, and I hope they're interested in as well.
Yeah, man.
Philosophy has always intrigued me. It's been something that I've always loved talking about. And
It's cool.
So what kind of led you down that path? Like, how did you get into the philosophical world?
It was... I had a background mostly in theology, and I remember taking like a pure philosophy course. Philosophy was always integrated in some way into like theological precepts. But I remember like reading Plato for the first time and it clicking, like understanding his theory of the forms, the theory of the real, the tripartite of the soul. And, reading philosophy for me was like some people who look at math equations, right? It just clicks. Or some people who walk up to a piano and they get it, or a guitar or whatever. For me, that's how philosophy was. There was an element that clicked. And it was the provoking of like critical thinking that I think I really enjoyed, is playing devil's advocate, thinking about ideas on both sides of a particular argument. And so those things, as I got better at it, you could tell by being well-read, who's a well-read philosopher, who's not. And then in the writing piece was the part that gave me like the most, I guess you can call it like intellectual pleasure, was like actually writing out arguments. Because, I'm kind of like the typical bro meathead guy, right? I love the gym. I love hanging out. I love drinking whiskey, love drinking beer. And I talk smack a lot, dude. Like we rouse each other a lot. But when you read my writing, it's like, wait, this dude doesn't write how he talks. And so there's a type of language game that is philosophical.
Right.
And I just really enjoyed it, dude. I really enjoyed it. And I wanted to use that platform as a way to make philosophy sort of accessible and applicable to everyday life. And for you saying, man, you love philosophy is music to my ears, because that's the beauty of philosophy. You don't need a freaking PhD in philosophy to be a philosopher. Just interest in it, man. Being an armchair philosopher is, for some people, like a great reward, right? To think about things, to have debates and discussions or discourse. And so that's kind of what brought me to it. And I just took it to the most retarded level ever. I don't know if I can say that.
It's fine.
I took it to the nth degree by getting a PhD, which was the hardest damn thing I've ever done in my life. And then all the other sort of charming things that came with it, like going to Oxford and doing some post-grad work there at Wycliffe Hall and getting to go to King's and Cambridge and all that sort of stuff, was fun. Like, that was just part of the journey for me. And not everybody's journey fits that sort of stereotypical academic or intelligentsia, trajectory.
Right.
I think you could be a philosopher and, just have conversations with friends,
Yeah.
you know, and that in itself, I think, is an important aspect of the life of the mind, is doing that sort of thing.
So how do you describe like philosophy to somebody that's never heard of it? Like, what is philosophy?
For me, philosophy at the heart is learning how to think well. Now, I'm not saying learn how to think properly or correctly, because that's going to vary depending on one's geographical location, one's economic upbringing, and
Sure.
ethnicity. But learning how to think well is what, for me, philosophy is, and it's the love of thinking. And it's always interesting when I'd give tests or exams or whatever, or get into conversations in my classrooms with students or even lay philosophers. They'll say things like this, and you probably heard this, man, my brain's hurting. Like, that's...
It's usually after a conversation I've said that.
That's a compliment, man, because it shows that the brain is working to think hard about ideas that you may take for granted or you may not have thought of before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what philosophy is. It's opening one's self, one's being, to an infinite amount of a horizon of what is possible. And that's what I hope philosophy does for my students. That's what I hope, how I would hope it infects and affects every aspect of my life. I see philosophy everywhere. And so people who will say, man, we don't need all this philosophy. I go, you know what? That's a really interesting philosophy, you know? And so that's sort of how I view philosophy. It's not an academic sort of discipline that is limited to those who are in school. It is a life discipline that is applicable to every person who exists, man.
Well, I mean, even the famous Greek philosophers, I mean, they weren't technically going to school. They were just sitting around talking with each other, correct?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there were no schools, right? They created the schools, you know, Aristotle, you know, the Lyceum and all of these different, Plato's Academy. Like, all of those things were started by philosophers, but they had no intention of creating like credential degrees or anything. These were just places that were used as platforms to teach and instruct and challenge, and then hopefully see that bleed out, which is the ultimate goal of philosophy, is what does it mean to have a good life? And that's the whole course of philosophy. And I think the better one's thought process is, the better one's life has the potential to be.
Right. So with, like, because obviously we consider the Greek philosophers, like those guys are like the fathers of philosophy. What sparked that revolution within Greece to where these guys were able to just like come up with, because I was listening to a podcast with Gad Saad, who's he's an evolutionary psychologist.
Yeah.
Incredibly smart.
Yeah, those guys are badass, man.
But he was just joking with the fact that he's like, every time I think I have like this original philosophical idea or thought, when I look it up, the Greeks have already thought of it, you know? So it was like, I think we lose some of that appreciation that these guys hundreds of years ago were thinking of these complex ideas before anybody was.
That's right.
So what do you think was like that spark in the revolution of philosophy there?
It's a hard question, dude. But I think some of the things that contribute to it was that Greece was situated in that particular era. It was an advanced civilization, an advanced society, and it gave people more room to think about things and to have the mind sort of go places it didn't have concerns about. Because when you think of like even medieval men, right, their main concern was, how am I going to eat today and where do I go when I die? Because that's coming. My death is coming probably as soon as my meal. Right. And so the mind had to be absolutely fixated on mere survival mechanisms. But when we think about that, man, when you have a good life, it opens up the mind to other ideas and other thoughts.
So when you're not constantly struggling to find food, fight off wild animals or whatever, you can sit around and discuss ideas.
That's right. And now, you know, when you think of someone like Socrates, he fits that mold, but yet Socrates was, by all intents, like he was a very poor person, but well respected. I mean, he still grew up, I mean, in a society that even being poor didn't mean like the detriment of your total existence, right? And the same thing can be said for many things, even in the U.S., right? Like every person in the U.S., even as poor as they may be, still has access to certain programs that can help.
Right.
Which I think that at that point, there's no excuse not to think about how we can better our lives and what avenues can we take and what sort of things can prompt us toward elevating our status.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true for the Greeks. And I mean, dude, you look at our Capitol buildings in Washington, D.C., the heart of our country, those things are shaped after the same buildings in Greece. And so it goes to show that because of the Greeks' particular situation, it opened up their minds to new possibilities other than, like you said, survival.
Mm-hmm. So who were the philosophers that kind of wrecked your world when you first started getting into your PhD?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, I started with the basic guys, but I wouldn't necessarily say like they...
So the basics like Plato, Socrates.
Yeah, Plato and
the household
Socrates,
names.
Yeah, Aristotle. You know, reading Descartes was really illuminating. The whole idea of a person, a human entity being a thinking thing was absolutely fascinating, of the different sort of thought experiments Descartes did. But the one philosopher that I read that just ruined me was a guy named Martin Heidegger out of Germany. And a brilliant thinker, but also he was a nefarious Nazi. And so Heidegger gets a lot of bad rap, rightfully so, because of his affiliation with the National Socialist movement in Germany. But historically speaking, every person in Germany was part of the National Socialist movement. And Heidegger, like any person who's trying to elevate their career, associated with them to advance his own sort of status in academia. It's debated whether or not he knew what was taking place in the camps and whatnot, and his writings are deeply, anti-Semitic and very nationalistic. And I remember I gave a lecture at Oxford once on a Heideggerian reading of a particular text of an early Christian text. And here I am in a room of like 150 scholars from all over the world. And the first question came from a guy in the front row who was a professor at the Hebrew University in Israel. And he goes, "Are we still reading Heidegger?" And of course, I can, empathize with that position and go, "Look, man, I get it. You being a Jewish man and Heidegger being a Nazi." And I said, but I'm careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I live in a country that has a preamble to a constitution that says we hold these truths to be self-evident, which is a philosophical term. Mm-hmm. The self-evident that all men are created equal, knowing that the guys who wrote that owned men of color that live behind their plantations and whatnot. And when you look at the document of the U.S. Constitution, like a lot of those dudes did not believe that to its logical conclusion. So that was sort of my response, man. But Heidegger's writing, Sein und Zeit, which means being in time, really challenges the notion of what it means to exist. Like, what does it mean for one to say that I am a human being? He coins this term in German called Dasein, which da in German is there, mm-hmm. and sein is being there. And Heidegger was quick to say that part of our human temptation is to project into the future, to always think about future possibilities, future causations and effects and whatnot. And he says there's something to be said about existing in the moment, mm-hmm. in the there-ness of being there, is how we'd say it. Or
mindfulness is kind of one of those same ideas, yeah.
Yeah, the word he uses is the word attunement, like being attuned. And I think that's a badass sentiment, man. Mm-hmm. Who cares if he's a Nazi? Who cares if he worked with Genghis Khan? Like, that's a truth that we can...
You're able to separate the man from his actions and his ideas. Like, it's hard because, I mean, we all have our shit, right?
Yeah.
And some of the greatest thinkers and the greatest activists in the world, they all had their shit too. Like, let's not throw out their ideas, because there are some really good, I mean, obviously he probably had some pretty bad ideas in there as well. But like, if you're able to separate the human from the idea and say, I understand that he said this, but I'm going to look at his work here and connect well with it.
That's
and,
right.
And I think there's something of value to that,
That's absolutely right, man. So when you think of something like the there-ness of being there, attunement, in order to be successful in anything, you have to be attuned. Whether we're talking like an entrepreneur, with O&S, like you have to be attuned to certain trends that are taking place,
Sure.
right? You can't just go off of what was successful last year. You have
Right.
to be attuned. In my relationship with my wife, I have to be attuned to what her needs are at this moment because, damn it, they shift all the time, right? And in order to be successful in whatever you're doing, there has to be an attunement and not just a projecting towards or a projecting forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something to be said about that philosophy that was absolutely unique. I mean, we can talk about it now, but because it's not very new.
Right.
But Heidegger's the force of that argument and what he talks about in there, man, just it awakened something inside of me that really was, I don't know, like sleeping. Like it was like a slumbering of some sort of idea. And that's where I took my dissertation. That's where my work is heavily sort of fixated now. And he does a critique of like modern technology that's really interesting. And so all that, man, like Heidegger was like the one that blew my shit out of the water. And it's a very difficult read. It's a very hard read. But I had a great mentor, Dr. Charles Bombach, who's one of the world's like foremost Heideggerian scholars, and he was the chair of my dissertation. So having his guidance is like having like a master captain
Sure.
at the helm
Yeah.
of a ship, and you're going through some freaking crazy choppy water. And he was absolutely brilliant. Charles is still a friend to this day, man. So
What would you say is like the most difficult part of your philosophical journey and like what you were trying to accomplish with getting your PhD, doing your postgrad at Oxford? Because that's a big deal. Like
Yeah.
they don't just let anybody in there.
No, man. It's the loneliness, dude. I think that was the hardest piece personally was the loneliness. I mean, you had friends who would just sort of like, ask kindly, like, so what are you writing about? It's like you
don't want to know.
You wouldn't get it. You wouldn't get it. Like it would take some time. It would take like an authentic conversation to kind of lay out what I'm thinking. But there was a lonely piece to it, man. And not to get too personal, but doing that sort of rigorous and remote and reclusive academic work weighed heavily on my family life, man. It took its toll on that part of it. Because you can't just lay in bed and talk about like, the phenomenological ideas of Nietzschean nationalism and Heidegger's thought, and your wife be like, tell me more. I'm really intrigued by this.
Just not interested.
Just not interested, man. So you're limited, and your chair is not always available either, your supervisor, because he has other students he's supervising and classes he's teaching. And so my greatest joy, I guess my, sort of that serotonin release was to experiment on my students, so to speak, to get in class. And I always use the last sort of 2 weeks of my semester to talk about Heidegger and his ideas, and to see some students like resonate with the work you're doing that's hidden underneath the guise of the learning objectives of this course.
Right.
Was really cool for me to see even some students taking their last paper and writing about, Heidegger's critique of technology, man. So that was the hardest piece, man. It wasn't the work itself, because you just grind away.
Right.
It was the loneliness, man, the loneliness aspect of doing that work alone.
What is some of the work that you've done that's it's been some of the more complex that you've like wrestled with within the philosophical world?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff I've written regarding what we call like embodiment, right? Embodiment and the effect of technological proliferation on human existence, how that doesn't just change, microphones amplify our voices, computers can stream us to different platforms. Like that's all nice, dude. My watch keeps time when I'm cooking. There's a certain level of convenience that technology gives us. But there's also a change in one's mindset. There's a change in one's thinkerly existence. Mm-hmm. And writing on that, man, I've met some pretty contentious responses, because my argument is technology is not just about improving upon previous improvements. Like this iWatch or iPhone watch or whatever. My wife gave me this. I don't even know what the fuck it's named, but it's an improvement on the previous one.
Right.
And that's how technology works, right? It's a step up of improvements on prior improvements. And my argument is great, but what's taking place to human identity, human embodiment through those improving previous technological improvements? And what my argument is that's been deeply controversial is this idea that things to the human mind only become valuable insofar as they're useful. And that's a problem. We begin to look at things differently. Our mind begins to cogitate things that are natural and appropriate, place upon them, project upon them certain ideas that, well, that's only good insofar as it's useful to me. So like a tree, we talked about this before. I'll ask students, what does a tree do? And they'll say, well, a tree gives us photosynthesis, right? To provide oxygen. A tree provides fruit for our food, provides shade when it's hot, or beautification of our property. And I go, do you think a tree gives a shit about any of that? And they give me this quizzical look, and I go, no. You know what a tree does? A tree trees. Tree does what a tree does.
Right.
We project or appropriate onto the tree beautification or the food or the oxygen and so forth. So in other words, we only see that tree invaluable insofar as it's providing some sort of useful utility for me. Same thing with rivers. Like, what do we look? We view rivers and we see them as modes of transportation or entertainment to swim in. Mm-hmm. But a rivers, man. And we dam them up to create energy, which is useful. And that's all good. But what happens when I start doing that to people? When I start looking at other people as only being valuable insofar as they're useful to me?
Interesting.
And so when I was a single guy, when I went through my divorce, I got on these dating apps. Like, I was married for almost 15 years. Dude, I didn't know what the hell that was. And the incessant swiping, right? Whether you're on Bumble, I don't know if guys here on Bumble or Tinder, whatever. But my argument was that how do these things work? Well, we upload a picture of ourselves, and not just any picture. It has to be
the right one,
the good one, the right angle, the picture that we're hoping someone finds valuable or useful. And then we tell our story, right? We give a short narrative about our existence, our achievements, whatever. And it's not hey, I cheated on my boyfriend in 12th grade.
Right.
And, I used to kick puppy dogs or whatever. We don't say that shit. We give like the best qualities of ourselves in our narrative because we want to be seen as being useful to someone. And when you begin to swipe on the other end, the person's going, not useful, not useful, not useful, possibly useful, And I make that argument in tongue-in-cheek kind of way, but I am being kind of serious. And dude, it's been met with like a furious sort of
What is the response? I mean, I can't figure out a valid argument against that idea.
Well, the idea is like, what else are we supposed to do? Like, we're looking for a mate.
Right.
Or we're looking for someone to spend our life with. I mean, are we just supposed to just take anything that comes along? And I go, well, no, I think there may be a better way to kind of orient oneself towards relationships that have more of a, I don't know.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're looking, I mean, yes, the Tinder example is an example, but I think you're looking at the bigger picture of right. Like how useful, like the way I view other humans is how useful are they to me?
That's right.
Whether you're doing it consciously or subconsciously.
Yeah, and we do this all the time.
Sure.
You think of someone when you see someone driving a Ferrari, like you immediately think, man, that sort of exudes wealth, right? And your mind may tell you, man, I'd love to meet that guy. And I mean, one guy on TikTok is making a living out of walking up to people in their expensive vehicles, and it shows the vehicle name and the cost. And what does he ask them? What do you do for a living? And they're like, oh, I'm in real estate, or I own a business or whatever. And he gets millions of views, like millions and millions of views, because people are interested in that sort of expression of existence. And that person's only useful as far as I know what they do for a living. Maybe I could do that, right? And for me, it's not a bad thing. It's not immoral or unethical anyway. But
this is the problem with philosophy, and I'm just going to say it right now, is that it wrecks your universe.
Oh, yeah.
Every single time you start to think about these things. Because now, like, my mind, I think it was Jordan Peterson I was reading, he made a statement like there's no such thing as an unselfish act.
Yeah.
Every act is a selfish act.
Yeah.
And I'm like trying to think. And the only one that the straw man was, well, what about a soldier that jumps on a grenade to save the rest of his group? And the cynic can say, he jumped on that because he wanted to be remembered as a hero. So and so, like, this is the problem with philosophy, because it's like we had this conversation. Maybe you can help me remember this, because it really wrecked me. It was about time. And you said that, I'm going to butcher this, so please interject when you remember what I'm talking about. Time begins and ends when we die.
Yeah.
What is that thought? So that everybody else, all the other listeners, can get their day wrecked today.
Dude, time's dangerous, man. I agree with St. Augustine. Like, I understand time until I start talking about it. Like, for us, time essences for us in certain ways. Like, I have a watch on my phone. You know, it's 11:30 right now. That's a way time essences, but it's not the essence of time. Like clocks on our wall, the sun rising and setting, or ways time to us will essence. But the essence of time, of being, is existence. Because while history books may give me a portal into the past, it's a past that I did not exist in. And so there's a vagueness to that.
Sure.
That really the only reason I'm reading that is for, selfish reasons, to get a good grade, or maybe I have some sort of interest in history. But time begins, like existence begins when you come into being. And time, for all of your intents and purposes, ends upon your ending, And that's not going into any sort of like religious ideas of what continues and what happens to the soul or the psyche or what have you. But we're very limited on what time we have. And for that reason, time remains a mystery, because there's no infinite beings that I've ever met. Every being is temporal, and therefore the liminal space of that person's time is that person's existence. And so it's I don't know, it could be a downer of a type of philosophy, or it can be a hopeful one.
Sure.
Like, it can motivate people to do the most they can with the time that they have. I mean, you think of people who get the worst news ever. They have a type of terminal cancer. A very small few will just kind of like, dwindle away.
Right.
And into that dark night, others will fight against it. I think of like Stuart Scott from ESPN. This dude was so freaking, he was mean about it. He's like, I'm fighting this shit. I'm fighting it to the end. And there's pictures of him doing jump ropes in a gym, and he's so freaking frail, but he was determined to use the time he had without any excuse or without placing any limitations, and that inspires people. But going back to the Peterson quote, there's no unselfish act. Well, then he'd have to admit that the bespeakment that he articulates was selfish in itself. Now, I don't believe that. I think he said that because he really thinks that. But even to say that would be a selfish act. Like, why are you doing that, Peterson? Now I got to question your motive for saying that very thing.
Exactly.
So
that's where it's like it becomes such a difficult argument and conversation to have. And I think that's true for so much of philosophy.
Yeah.
That people don't, if people don't want to do the mental exercise of diving deep into philosophy, because like we'll start, my wife and I will start talking some of this stuff, and she's like, I'm too tired.
Yeah.
I'm too tired. And I get it. Like,
dude.
This stuff is like, we were having a conversation 2 nights ago, whenever they released the new telescope.
Oh, yeah.
Pictures. So I believe a lot of people right now are having this existential philosophical crisis that's
Yeah.
going on in their head, because it's like you see this picture and it's the clearest picture of all of these galaxies
Yeah.
that we're looking out. And so I start thinking with my wife, I'm like, how wild is it that us as humankind like sent this massive telescope with a camera in it to the outer limits of our solar system.
Yeah.
We took pictures and we sent it all the way back millions and millions of miles, from millions of miles, and now we're looking at it.
Yeah.
And we're looking at a picture of thousands of other galaxies.
Yeah.
And what the cool thing, what NASA said, is that if you took that picture, okay, if you pick up a grain of sand and hold it up in the air in the night sky, that grain of sand is covering the night sky, the amount of sky we took a picture of.
Yeah.
So in that grain of sand,
That's crazy.
thousands of galaxies.
Yeah.
Like we're fighting over trivial things.
Dude.
And it's just like we are so small within the universe.
Yeah.
And it's just it's this like existential like crisis that we start to
dude.
have when we really and then she's like, I don't want to think about this
Yeah.
anymore. Like it's incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's often uncomfortable for people to think about how small they are, but yet still how large you are. Like I grew up, I'm almost 50 years old, dude, and I grew up in a time studying biology where a picture of a cell was you had the cell wall, you had the nucleus, you had different flagella in there, and that was the cell to us.
Right.
And you had to memorize it on a test, right? And label each one. This is the mitochondria. This is the nucleus. Dude, that was even more advanced than Darwin's understanding of the cell.
Right.
But now, because of the technology we have, one cell in your body in and of itself is a universe.
Yeah.
Like that is absolutely mind-blowing. And philosophically speaking, there was a philosopher, he's slipping my mind, but he talks about this idea of the one in the many, right? This notion of it's unfathomable of the atomic structure of things, the things that we can't see. In Germany, a guy named Immanuel Kant talked about he called it the Sing und Ich, the thing in itself. Like you never see the thing in and of itself. You only see what the mind processes through like visual stimuli, right? So like this table, I see a table. Why is this a table? Because I've been taught it's a table. It has a certain shape that fits tableness. But dude, when you start looking at it at the molecular level, like you start seeing things, even you just get closer with your own naked eye, you begin to see striations and colorations that weren't visible before.
Right.
And I think what you just said, man, is absolutely important to not only philosophy about existence, but to science and where do we go from here? And I think it infects religion as well. Like, how do we come to understand and situate human beings within a certain type of ethical, a certain type of political, religious, throughout whatever boundaries we have, culturally speaking? When we see how small we really are, I think it's then we can see how important we really are to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the one and the many, and it's the many that make the one. We're all one race of people, and to view someone as being below oneself for whatever reason, it's the worst kind. It's the worst kind of existence that you can have. And that's my whole heart of philosophy is if your philosophy, there is no difference unless it makes a difference, is what I say all the time. And I tell my students this the first day of every intro to philosophy class, every intro to humanities class, every intro to political philosophy, whatever I'm teaching. By the end of this course, I don't give a shit what you believe, except that I want to be a better human. If philosophy doesn't give you the qualities of becoming better, then it's not really philosophy, right? It's not the love of wisdom, because I think the more wise we become, I think the more precious we see each other.
Sure.
And that's my whole goal. You know, I have friends, man, all they want to do is chase the dollar. And that's cool. Go for it, man. But if in doing that, if that's your philosophy, in doing that, if that causes you to like demean or become a very pejorative person towards other people, then it's the wrong philosophy for you, man. And so for me, I've committed my life to education, to serving, right, to helping people. And that doesn't pay a lot of money, man, but it gives me a sense of, man, it puts me in a position to always being in a state of becoming better, becoming a better human, a better father, a better husband to my wife, a better friend.
Yeah.
And that's how philosophy affects me. We can go down the deep rabbit holes or the black holes of different philosophical ideas. But I think what that telescope picture shows us is how rare our consciousness is and how beautiful the content of our consciousness is. And you saw that picture the same way some little kid in sub-Saharan Africa would see it.
Yeah.
And your amazement is probably the same type of amazement he has. And yet we're still on this rock going 66,000 miles an hour through the solar system, you know, trying to do what we can to live and have a happy life, man. So
yeah, it's a humbling experience for sure. But I think even what you said with like chasing the dollar and stuff like that, you know, I have to balance that with being an entrepreneur. Like,
oh yeah,
you know, you have to. I think money is a motivator for a lot of people, for sure. But making a difference, I think, especially for me, like I want to leave a legacy in my life. I that's like a really, really important thing. And I struggle with that because it's like, well, what does that mean? Yeah. And I've got a really good friend of mine. He started a foundation. He's an entrepreneur, but he started this amazing foundation called Adventure for All. And I've seen him go through probably like 3 different business ideas. And I see the impact he's making with his foundation. I get emotional when I talk about it sometimes because it's like the happiness that he's found. Yeah, man. Doing this. Yeah. Far outweighs any happiness he found in business. Yeah. So this is like, I love what I do. I love this company. I love that like I pinch myself sometimes that I wake up and this is my life. Yeah. I get to do things that I love. So there's a lot of happiness and fulfillment that comes in that, but there's something to this idea of helping people that really outside, like more so than money. Yeah. You know, and some can make the argument, well, the more money you have, the more people you can help. Yeah. And I think that's a valid argument. True. Yeah. Like, I think that's true. I think there's a lot of people that do a lot of really good things with their money. But the impact that he's making, and like I can literally see the effects of it with these kids that he's working with. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, but it was just like it's always a battle. Yeah, man. Right? Like
you live in that tension of that truth, you know? But I do believe this, man. Every person at some point needs another person to get to that next level. Like we all need someone to believe in us, to give us a shot. Now we may blow that shot, and that's on us, you know. I don't know if it's Tom Brady who said it, like he was a 6th round pick. Yeah. And he goes, look, I don't care if he was 6th. He goes, I was number 199. But my chance came. And when I got in, I didn't want to blow that chance. Yeah. And look at, like, he's the GOAT, dude. Whereas I was reading an article this morning, you know, I'm an LSU boy. So reading an article of the number 1 pick, Jamarcus Russell, who had that opportunity right away. Everyone was looking at him and drops the ball, you know, does all sorts of crazy things. They give him a tape of the game saying, hey, watch this tape, tell us what you think. And there was nothing on the tape. And he comes back and he's like, here's what I think, coach. And they're like, you didn't even watch it. Damn. You know, like completely blowing his opportunity that was given to him. And so even for me, you know, I needed people in my life along the way to believe in me, to give me a shot. And I can list, you know, a handful of people who gave me that opportunity and put me in positions to succeed. Yeah. And I think if we all do that, even as small as it is, you know, like I give my son opportunities to go fish. You know, he loves fishing, man. And dude, he's gotten so good at it. But that didn't cost me anything. Maybe some time, waking up a little early to get out of bed and take him. But even that is in and of itself like giving him an opportunity to succeed at what he wants to do. O&S, I'm sure someone said, hey man, I'm going to come alongside you, mentor you, talk to you, give you advice along the way. And that had to be valuable to you. I mean, now imagine if we all did that for one person or two people.
Yeah.
Like, we would change the world, man. I like what Jeff Bezos says. I mean, he gets a lot of shit for being the richest guy, but he goes, look, man, Amazon's worth like $1 trillion. I'm worth like a couple of $100 billion, which means I've made wealth I've made other people $800 billion wealthier than even what I'm worth.
Yeah.
Like, that's a great way to sort of situate the ideas. Like, I created a platform to give you an opportunity to do this.
Right.
And you can't squander it, man. You can't squander it. You got to give it your best. And, that's where I think philosophy can help.
Yeah.
Is you do the hard work mentally of thinking about things. Because I'm sure when you started O&S, you didn't just jump in blindly and throw a bunch of your money up front and say, hey, I'm going to sell these badass shirts to athletes and it's going to take off. I'm sure you had ups and downs. You had a freaking pandemic you had to deal with.
Yeah.
And you had to think through these things, man. You had to think through these things. Now, you may not call it philosophy, but I would say you had to think philosophically about this. Like, how are we going to promote this now? What's the best way for us to get the word out that we're still in business? What's the best way for us to pose these athletes that gives the shape of my clothing? Like, those are philosophical ideas, man. You're looking for wisdom even in your own business model.
Yeah.
Churches do it all the time. Like, what's the best way to reach people in our community? Nonprofits do it. Amazon does it. They do Prime Day. Like, for me, that's all philosophy, man. That's all thinking critically about ways to excel, to expand, and to become better. And that's philosophy is everywhere.
Yeah,
it's everywhere.
One of the things I picked up from my my buddy Chase is he writes when he thinks. I don't do that, and I started with, I can't remember what it was, but I was like, okay, I'm going to think about this problem, but I'm going to write it down. And if you read it, this is just nonsense, right? Because like my writing is all over the place. Yeah. But it was the most impactful like thinking session that I've ever had was to like actually write this stuff down. And then I come across a Jordan Peterson quote that he's like, if you're not writing, you're not thinking. Like, what is it about this idea of like, okay, I'm writing out my thoughts? Because I'm constantly, like, O&S is something that I'm constantly thinking about. Like, even when I'm not at work, even when I wake up, I go to the gym, I'm thinking about it. Okay, this is the immediate problems I have in front of me right now. What are the things that we can tackle? What are the things we can do? What are the creative elements that we can do to get the brand out there? Should I run a sale? Should I not? Like, it's a never-ending problem that I'm constantly working through. And I don't know the answers. I haven't found those answers yet. I hope to. But it is like a constantly thought through problem that is, I don't think I'll never stop thinking about it.
No, I think writing down gives you at least the opportunity to come back to it in obviously like written literary form. Whereas thinking evaporates. Right, it evaporates. Like, it's hard for me to think about what I thought about yesterday, because there'll be times, like for me, what I do for a living is I'm a communicator, right? I speak, whether I'm speaking in class or in our church gathering or whatever that I'm a part of. I'll wake up at night and have like this badass idea, this quote that comes to mind that I could implement into what I'm doing. And if I'm being honest, just fucking lazy. Like, I don't want to grab a pen or write. So what I use now is I was like, hey, Siri, take a note. And I'll go, boom. If you want something you've never had, you're going to have to do something you've never done. Note taken. Boom. And I can come back to it. At least I have that. Right. But I'm very keen to keep those ideas because you just never know, man. The brain is such a powerful organ. Like, we are all brain. Like, I believe that. Yeah. Like, everything is constituted and situated by the brain. And the brain doesn't go off, dude. You might be sleeping, but that's just because your body is controlled by the brain going, it's time for rest. We need to recover or whatever. But the brain's never stopping. The brain is constantly thinking about those things we value. And we get to choose that, right? There's a certain piece of us that gets to choose what our brains are conforming to and what we find important. And so for you, O&S, yeah, man, like write stuff down. For me, ideas of communication or rhetorical strategies and that I can use that I know will be impactful. So I can come back to those and use those, because I think every person is gifted with a unique type of brilliance that they can use to contribute to the world, to make the world a better place. And some of that can be certain quotes and sentiments and ideas. For other people can think about ways in which, hey, how can I be a better student today and open up new horizons for me? What way can I be this? We all have, again, our own unique type of brilliance that we bring to the world. And I'll never forget, man, I was working at a church in Plano, Texas. And one of my kids there had cerebral palsy, and his name was Cade. And he'd come in with his little arm walkers, dude. And the best day of my freaking life, dude, was every Wednesday having to physically pick him up and put him on the djembe, because he played the djembe in our youth band.
That's awesome.
And he loved the way I speak. He loved my communication. I'll never forget, he came up to me one day, he goes, Troy, I want to be a youth minister. I want to be a youth minister. But I know I'll never be able to do that. And I said, oh, no, Kate. I said, that's incorrect, man. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to start thinking about ways in which you can become that. So you're going to have to think beyond your current situation. Because I know for him, what constantly consumed his mind was his disability. It constantly consumed him. Probably gave him a lot of insecurity. Probably recognized people noticed him. Like how you think about O&S is probably how Cade thought about cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
And I said, you're going to have to do the hard work. I can't do it for you, but I'll be there to help and guide those thoughts through to positivity. And dude, for whatever reason, he came back with the most brilliant idea. He Googled ministers who had cerebral palsy. And he goes, there's a guy in Dallas who's the pastor of a church. You think we can go visit him? So I reached out. The guy's name was Justin. I sent him an email. Said, hey, man, I have a kid in my youth group, cerebral palsy. Can we take you to lunch? He was like, absolutely. Bro, that was so freaking awesome, dude, to see two guys who had the same disability talking about goals and dreams, and seeing Cade like just light up, man. Here's this 14-year-old kid. Dropped him back off, man. His dad called me, and his dad was going through a rough time, going through a divorce, and mom had left, and he called and he's like bawling his eyes out going, I now know that my son's future is bright. And I was like, he did the work. Mm-hmm. He did the work. He let his mind open up to new possibilities and didn't let his mind stay consumed by that disability.
Right.
And so, dude, that's like, for me, to share that story is, I'll have to share it one day again, but that for me is the power of the mind. Mm-hmm. If you can just think beyond the current situation, the current limitation, mm-hmm. and it takes hard work, man. Yeah. It takes hard work. Sometimes it takes you believing in yourself, even when no one else does.
100%.
And so we all have that power, dude.
Sure.
Every person, I don't give a shit who you are, you have that power within you. And this is why I don't understand why someone like a Jordan Peterson gets all the crap he gets, because that's basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's like, you have endless potential inside of you.
Right.
Endless potential. Go for it. Think about it, because at some point, worlds are going to collide and you're going to meet someone who believes the same shit about you that you were believing. I can do this. And they're going to be like, here's your chance, go. And so that's the power. And for me, that's pure philosophy, dude. That's pure the love of wisdom, and thinking through what is available to all of us, man. So
it is amazing. Like, there's a badass motherfucker. His name's David Goggins.
Oh yeah,
and if you haven't read his book, it's amazing.
Yeah,
Can't Hurt Me is the name of the book. I remember listening to that audiobook while running, and he talks about this idea of, like, you don't know how much you're leaving on the table.
Oh yeah.
He's like, every human has so much potential. He's like, you have to unlock. And he's an ultra marathon runner. He's a Navy SEAL. He held the world record for pull-ups. He's just a badass.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, my normal running was 3 miles. 3 miles, I could hit it. 3 miles, I'm done. And when I was reading this book, on Monday, I ran 3 miles. I started reading this book. On Tuesday, I ran 6 miles. I didn't have, like, my cardiovascular training didn't improve overnight.
Right.
No, I just was like, oh no, we're running 6 miles today. Mm-hmm. And so unlocking that potential, like, you have to have a fair amount of blind faith.
Yeah.
When it comes to running a business, an entrepreneur, and putting your product out there. You're just like, because like you said, there is at the end of the day, there could be a point to where nobody believes in this and in you but yourself.
That's right.
So you have to have that power to push through and keep going. Mm-hmm. And I just remember, like, getting to, like, mile 6 and just being like, holy shit, I did it.
Yeah.
And, like, the belief in myself, like, you can do it.
Yeah.
You put the limit, and it's like the 4-minute mile, right? Yeah. Like, it's impossible.
Yeah.
No human can run a 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
And then somebody does it. And then 70 people do it after that.
That's right.
And now high schoolers are running 4-minute miles.
That's right.
So there is this idea of untapped potential. Like, the restrictions that we're putting on ourselves are in our mind.
Yep.
Now, the question, this is calling back way further into your discussion, but I wanted to chat with you about this idea of, okay, if our mind is what constitutes our being, where does consciousness fall into that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a question I'm not equipped fully to answer. I mean, I've read, like, Daniel Dennett's ideas of consciousness and John Searle's ideas of consciousness, and they're all different. Like, consciousness is the big mystery, right? It's the huge mystery.
You can't point to it, right?
No, you can't point to it. You know, it's a function of our brain in some capacity. But it is safe to say that human consciousness is very unique in a particular way. Mm-hmm. Like the way that we think about death. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't know what a dog thinks about death, or what a cat or a squirrel or whatever. But I do know that if I'm thinking about this, everyone else is too, at some level, thinking about our own demise. And as far as we know, humans are the only ones who have a conscious sort of understanding of the temporal aspect of our being. And so there's something, I think, to that. Like, the arguments from science are, on one hand, we are just this huge cosmic accident that took place. We were never supposed to know, about this shit. But yet here we are. I say that sometimes to Esther when I'm having a bad day. I'm like, we just never were supposed to know. And she knows what I'm talking about. I was like, we just never were supposed to know. And she laughs. But on the other hand, what if it's not like an accident? What if some of the more mystic side of existence is true? That our consciousness is a revelation of a type of divinity within us, right? Something that exists inside of us that gives us that unlimited potential. Because it can't just be consciousness alone that gives us that. We actually have physical bodies, right? We have mental states of ideas and thoughts and dialogue. And for me, like, evolution is part of that whole process, of how consciousness can shift and change from us being in complete competition with one another for resources to thinking, someone thought, like, this ain't working. Like, we're killing each other for limited resources, maybe competition isn't best for our survival, but cooperation. That shifts one's conscious awareness of others and things like that. And it's interesting, man, that's where the ideas of ethics begin to come into play in terms of like our civilizations, where we're not killing each other for the deer, but we're learning how to consciously manipulate the land and grow grain. Like, that's a phenomenon that's to this day is a mystery. It's a mystery of how that all went down. But I think it's just it's someone in our ancestral lineage who said, we have to be better. We have to be better than this caveman shit, you know?
Right.
And who knows? He probably did it and someone killed him or whatever, took his crop, but he began. And I think there's a lot of cool ethical stories throughout religion and the humanities that talk about these things, where when a person becomes conscious of something taking place that's bettering humanity, like if you can take like the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, 2 fish and 5 loaves. Well, some people want to present that as a miraculous story. Well, I say no. I think it's a pretty basic example where when I see someone sharing their food, I'm gonna start sharing mine. Whereas before I was kind of hoarding it because I don't know, like there's a lot of people here who may be hungry, but wait, he's sharing it. I'm gonna go ahead and share. Oh, he's sharing, and then it's the multiplicity of giving and sharing. That, for me, unlocks human potential for kindness and goodness and givenness, but it all stems from our conscious attunement to that. Were there people in the world or even in that story who kept it for themselves and didn't share? Obviously, it probably were. But what's the better story? Like, what's the better story to our ethical consciousness, Right. Because consciousness situates itself not only as like awareness of existence, but think about everything within the content of my consciousness, things I find beautiful, things I am attracted to. Like, that's different for me, the type of whiskey I like, the type of food I eat,
Right.
the type of regiment that I do in the gym, the type of intermittent fasting you do versus what I do. All of that is the content of our consciousness, which for me makes consciousness even that much more sort of mysterious, man. So I don't know if that made sense or not.
No, it did. It did. It has me thinking because there's something to DNA memory. Mm-hmm. This is another thing Gadsad talked about when he was, being an evolutionary psychologist. Like, this is sort of right in his wheelhouse. There's our DNA has memory. Mm-hmm. So why do humans have an ability to see snakes very easily?
Yeah.
And they think that's because of our evolutionary understanding of, oh, snakes are bad, snakes are bad, snakes are bad, snakes are bad. So it's almost like consciousness is passed to our kids.
Yeah.
And we got some of our consciousness from our parents and from our great-grandparents.
That's
and
interesting,
our great-great-grandparents. It's you can almost think about it that way as well. Why are kids afraid of the dark?
Yeah.
Outside of the idea that I can't see.
Yeah.
There's this idea maybe we're so in tune with being afraid of the dark because 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, when it got dark out, you couldn't see the big cat that was about to eat you.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So it's it's
right.
ingrained in our DNA.
That's right.
And maybe that's what consciousness is as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any one thing because you can't point where's your brain? Where's your heart? Where's your consciousness?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right? These are the kind of things that when I get to talk to someone like you about, it just really gets me thinking. And I love that aspect of our relationship. Now, a lot of the guys that you talked about today, a lot of them are atheists.
Yes. You're
not an atheist.
No.
What kind of, when you see the picture of the telescope or the picture from the telescope, how do you look at that?
Yeah.
And still believe there's a greater being?
Yeah. I think it's easier for me to say what I don't do when I see a picture like that. I don't immediately start quoting scripture and saying, oh, look at the amazing, the grandeur of the heavens. God created the heavens and the earth. Because those guys didn't see that, I think there's some truth to maybe some of the more mystical believers who looked up and went, that's a lot of space up there. And there's a lot of space I'm not seeing. I think there may have been a consciousness about the unknown, but that was highly limited. I mean, again, they were more concerned about what am I going to eat tomorrow as opposed to who made all this. So for me, I see something like the telescope picture, you know, even versus what the Hubble telescope had given us years ago. And to be honest, I don't think it does anything to improve my theistic. It doesn't do anything to like elevate it, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't add to it, because I have a very different view of God, right? I don't view God as the old man with the beard and sits in some heaven. For me, God is, in a way, in all these things. God is not a human, even though a lot of religious people say, hey, he loves you today or whatever. Like, God's not a he. Like, God doesn't have a penis, right? He has no gender specific. He's not a her. For me, God is an it, a very mysterious it. But where I throw in, so the way I say it, I'll let the cat out of the bag. For me, there are all sorts of ways with which we can sort of understand philosophically our being. One is what we call epistemology. So it's what I know. Like, epistemology is the study of knowledge. Like, how do we come to know and believe things? And we say epistemically. So for my knowledge, I'm an agnostic. I don't know with 100% certainty whether or not there's a God or not. That's just truth. And I think any person who says different, absolutely mistaken. They're absolutely mistaken. There's no way you can know 100% that there is a God. But ontologically, this is how I exist, how I live, the practices of my being, the way I go about my days. That makes sense. Yeah. That's ontology. It's the study of our being. Ontology, or ontologically, I live as though there is a God. And so with that said, I kind of look to the teachings of Jesus as a guideline, as a guidebook on how to be ethical and how to love people and how to treat people and how to be myself, right? So that's sort of where I stand. Epistemically, I don't know. I can make an argument. Atheists have
great arguments.
Oh, they have fucking amazing arguments. Theists have arguments that I'm just not convinced about. Mm-hmm. And anytime I get into a debate with a more conservative believer, the first thing I have to stipulate is what you think about this book and what I think about this book are absolutely different. I don't view this book as authoritative. You do. And until you can convince me that it is, then we can't discuss these ideas on a level playing field.
Right.
You're always going to think you have the upper hand when in fact you don't. I mean, the Bible's a very scrupulous book, man. That's a book that was put together not by God. It's not like God dropped it from heaven and said, "Here you go, read this shit." It was compromised by men voting. No women were involved in that. As far as I know, no people of color were involved in that. It was a bunch of guys putting together books that met a particular standard of identity regarding a particular human character, Jesus. And if your book about Jesus didn't meet the standard that men created, then it was thrown out and became the Gnostic Gospels. And there are lots of those you can read, and those are fascinating reads as well. So with that, that's why I say epistemically, the best I can do would be agnostic, going, I don't know, one way or the other. But ontologically, I try to live my life selflessly by being a person who loves people, who tries to understand, and who believes people are essentially good. You know, I want to believe that. And we do bad things, mm-hmm. but it doesn't, I don't think that that's a fair summarization. I tell a story sometimes when I was in New Orleans with some friends. We're having some drinks and we're walking around Jackson Square, and there's a guy out there with the Jesus loves you, don't go to hell sign, you know, right. And he's got the big cross and the big bullhorn, and no one's stopping to talk to this dude, man. No one's wanting to hear what he has to say, so he has to scream it over everyone. Like that improves his argument.
Right.
And I remember passing by, and here I am, someone who identifies with a similar sort of theological position. And I just said, I'm gonna go talk to this guy. And my friends are like, "Don't do it, bro. Don't do it. Don't." So I walk over. I was like, "Hey, man, tell me about this Jesus guy. Like, he doesn't know I have all these advanced degrees in theology. I read Greek. I read Hebrew." And he goes, like, he's absolutely surprised.
I got one.
Reeling me in like my son. And he's like, "Look, man, God loves you. He sent his son to die for you," and all these deep, very, very troubling theological positions. That God kills his son because he loves a being, but yet the son was God, and so God committed suicide. Like, I don't know. Like, you have a lot to freaking reconcile, dude. And I just asked basic questions. Look, I'm a good guy, man. Like, I've never hurt someone intentionally. He's like, "Well, can I ask you some questions?" I was like, "I love questions. Have you ever lied?" And I said, "Of course. Yeah, man, I've told a lie." And he goes, "What's that make you?" And he wants me to say, "A liar." It's not what I said. "What's that make you?" I said, "It makes me someone who's told a lie." And he goes, No, makes you a liar." And I went, No. I said, "Because I've also told the truth. What's that make me?" Dude, his mind was fucking blown. Like 20 seconds into that conversation, he goes, "Have you ever stole anything?" I was like, "Yeah, dude, you got me. I stole stuff before. Taking candy from a store or whatever, walked out with shoes, whatever." He's like, "What's that make you?" And I was like, "Someone who stole something." He's like, "No, it makes you a thief, man." And I went, "No, because I've also given stuff away from the goodness of my own heart. What's that make me?" So he's trying to totalize my existence by a few mistakes. Mm-hmm. Now, I get it, man. Granted, humans make some fucking terrible mistakes. Sure. What do you call a murderer? No, man, I've also let people live. Also let my people escape. Like, what do you do then?
Right.
I mean, there's some, it can be confounding at times, but I just don't believe a person wakes up one day and goes, pedophile. That's a great career move.
Right.
I think things happen and triggers happen, things flip in our life, and it leads to an ultimate decision to harm someone else. That is caused by a plethora of things that we don't fully understand psychologically, mentally. But I just don't believe humans are evil when they're born. That they can become that, through a series of unfortunate events, man. But that's where I'm at, on that whole, the God spectrum, man. The best I got is agnostic, but the way I live and the way I want to teach people to live is in accordance with a certain type of moral awareness, that who you are is more than you are. So, you're a dad. What makes you a dad?
I've got kids.
You got kids.
Yeah.
Not just you articulating that you're a dad.
Right.
If you told someone, "Hey, Rick, tell me something about yourself," you say, "Oh, man, I'm a dad." "How many kids you got?" "Oh, none." So, in essence, your children are what make you a dad. Right. And I think that's a huge part of your identity, dude. You're a badass dad. You love your girls, You're a husband. You have a wife? Well, that's what makes you a husband, right? And so forth. And so you're a business owner. O&S is what makes you a business owner. So much of who we are has nothing to do with who I am. Mm-hmm. My being is often constituted by others, And I think if we can even just come to that basic awareness, man, we can do so much good in the world, to realize that it's not just about us. Mm-hmm. There are certain things that are, right? There's certain things that who I am is because of who I am. But most of my being, man, is because of others in my life. And for me, it gives me a sense of hopefulness, like, who else can be a part of my life and make me better?
I love that.
So
no, that's good shit, man. A lot to think about. This is one of the things I love about our conversations, is I always leave feeling like, okay, I got a lot to think about here.
Yeah.
So for a novice guy like me who wants to get into philosophy, what are some of the starting points that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think
Any books?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to start like with like basic philosophy, and I would buy like a cheap textbook at a half price books or a thrift store books.com, whatever. But just find like an intro to philosophy textbook, man. It's going to give you don't have to read all of the Republic of Plato. It's going to give you the most important snippets.
Okay.
And most of the time, the authors who compiled these different readings are going to give you like really good interpretations. And what that's going to do is that's going to sharpen your own hermeneutical ideas or interpretive ideas. You might say, I don't think that's what Plato's really saying here. I think he meant this, and that's cool, dude. So you can disagree with even the author who's compiled those things.
Right.
But I would just start there and just start reading. And, I wouldn't jump right into Heidegger right away for people. But
You handed me a Heidegger book, and I still haven't read it.
Just threw you into the deep end.
You really did.
But I would start with that, man. Just start reading just a compilation of different philosophical ideas, like in a textbook.
Awesome.
And it's a good place to begin.
Well, dude, I really appreciate this conversation, and I know I got to get you out of here, but where can people find you if they like what you're talking about, and if you're saying things that they connect with? Where are some of the social aspects that they can find you, Instagram, that kind of stuff? Yeah,
so my Instagram handle is just at Troy A. Doucet. And there's some philosophy on there, man. I'll post some things, but a lot of times it's just family. So if you're interested in like what philosophers do, you'll see a lot of beach. You'll see a lot of whiskey and just hanging with friends. But my academic work is at academia.edu. And you just search my name, Troy Doucet. My work, man, it's been cited in over 300 works in 38 countries. And you can see a lot of the papers that I've published are on there. So academia.edu.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I love you, dude. Thanks, man.